my senior year, I remember there was a scout there, happened to be at practice one day watching me. It was Lou GROZA. I averaged 12 yards per reception, which is better than Ozzy's. I only had one. He had 600 and some, but...
and your touchdown percentage ratio was 100%.
100%. Gib Shanley had decided that he wanted to go out to LA, and that opened up a spot in the radio booth, and I ended up there and been there for a while.
Welcome again to Club 46, driven by Bridgestone. This week, our all-time Browns great, I'm going to call him Mr. Browns because I don't think anybody else can have that title, Doug Dieken. Doug, so good to see you again.
Well, pleasure to be here, but there's a lot of great ones that are Mr. Brown before me.
48 years you have in some way, shape, or form been with the Cleveland Browns, going all the way back to the time you were drafted in 1971. What do you make of that when you say that out loud, 48 years with one organization?
Well, I'm very fortunate and very lucky. I just, sometimes it's not always about the talent. Sometimes it's being at the right place at the right time. And, you talk about players and they say, well, he didn't have that talent. Sometimes it's just being at the right place. And I guess my example would be when I was drafted by the Browns. I'd never played tackle in my life, and they drafted me, and kind of, I remember the phone call. Nick Scorridge says, we just drafted you in the 6th round as an offensive tackle. And I says, what? And he says, offensive tackle. I said, any chance that I'll get to play tight end? He says, well, we'll see when you get here. And when they gave me a 73 number, and I said, well, I'm dead on that one. So we made the best of the situation, and it turned out well.
You've seen some great football here, part of some terrific teams during your 14-year playing career. 4 times you were on teams that made the playoffs. As a player, what are some of the more memorable, what's the most memorable football game you ever played in as a member of the Cleveland Browns?
Well, most people would look at it as a negative, but I would say the Red Right 88 game. Yeah. Just the season, it encompassed a team that just came and played together as a team and might have been played better than what we were, but each week somebody would come up and make a play, and that was important. Kind of the reason for the success. But when my first year here, it was I caught the tail end of some of the '64 championship guys. Shafrath, Hickerson, Leroy, Gary Collins, my boyhood hero, and it was like these guys expected to win on Sunday, and then all of a sudden they got old and they retired, and they had a rebuild, and we had one season we started out 0-9. And you're going like, oh boy, this is a little tougher than I thought, because you kind of got spoiled where, those first 2 years you're in the playoffs and you play the Colts one year, and then you lose to the undefeated Dolphins team the next year in the playoffs, and then you go about 8 more years before you make the playoffs again.
You mentioned the Red Right 88 game, and that of course is synonymous with Cleveland sports history. What are your recollections of the play and the immediate aftermath?
Well, it was one of those things where Brian had an unbelievable year. He was the league MVP, and anything that involved Brian, you just trusted. And the irony of the whole situation, the guy that made the interception, Mike Davis, they say that he had the worst hands in the history of the Raiders, and it's like 32 below zero, and he catches the ball. And it was obviously one of the coldest days you could ever have to play football. But when that pass got intercepted, how quiet 80,000 got in such a short period of time. And it was just like dead silence. And I went home, and I didn't even want to go out that night. My brother happened to be in town, and he said, come on, you got to go out. So we went out, and there was a Victoria Station where the guys used to go after the game, and people were so appreciative of the season. And you were down, and you felt like, you kind of left that night and you felt a little better about it.
When you look back at it, was that a Browns team that could have won the Super Bowl?
Yeah, I think so. The Raiders, who we lost, I think they went on and did.
They did.
So it was, we would have had to play the Chargers the next week had we won that game, because they won their playoff game, and we had played them earlier in the year. So yeah, I think it's a team that could have.
At what point did you finally put that loss behind you?
Probably a month or so. I mean, you always thought about it. What if? And it was such a it was such a cold day, and you couldn't even wear cleats, because this was before they had the heating systems in the field. And we actually had, they called them broom ball shoes, and they were like tennis shoes with suction cups. And the good part about it is everybody came down to our speed, the offensive lines, all these quick guys. But it was without a doubt. I don't know how the people in the stands sat there for the 3 hours. It was cold.
Who were some of your favorite teammates?
Oh, I think the guys on the offensive line: Robert Jackson, CODY, Tom DeLeon. Unfortunately, Thomas passed. Henry Shepherd, and then Jerry Shirk was one of my. I went through a lot of roommates. Dino Hall, probably one of my favorites too. Brian Sipe. There was a lot of just guys that we had a lot of good team chemistry, and I think sometimes that can take a good team and make it a better team, and I think that was one of the keys, and it starts with the quarterback. If the quarterback is a team player, I think it makes it a lot easier for everybody to follow suit.
You have so many great stories, and I'm sure you've told them countless times through the years. But as you look back on your playing career, just that 14-year stretch, what's your favorite Cleveland Browns story?
I think the 1980 season was special. Just the way that the town wrapped itself around the team. Everything was cardiac kid this, cardiac kid that. They had a song for everything that went on, and I don't know if you can put it to one thing. It's just there's years that you sat there and you would hope they never end, and then there was years you'd say, when's this thing going to be over?
Let's go way back, even before your Illinois days. What was Doug Dieken, the young teenager, like?
I think I was fortunate. I grew up in an era where they allowed you to play 3 sports. Today I think you see in high school where you're going to be a football player, you're going to be a basketball player, and I actually, you didn't have Pee Wee football back then. So when football came around my freshman year in high school, it was the first time I got a chance to play. My brother was 6'8", and I thought I was going to be 6'8", and I was going to be a basketball player. And the basketball coach says, if you want to go out for basketball, I want you in shape. So you're either going to go out for cross country or football. I said, well, that's a pretty easy choice. So, I went out for football.
That was your first taste of it at
That
14?
was my first taste, yeah.
Wow.
And so, I was a wide receiver. I actually ended up being an all-state wide receiver 2 years. And then I went to Illinois. I ended up playing wide receiver. I was a starting wide receiver. You couldn't play as a freshman on the varsity. I was a starting wide receiver my sophomore year, and my junior and senior year I was a tight end. So my senior year, I remember there was a scout there, happened to be at practice one day watching me. It was Lou GROZA.
Wow.
And actually that day they actually had me playing defense. We were a little thin on the ranks. We didn't have a good football team. But that was one of the first pro football players I ever met, and I thought he was a hell of a scout.
He made at least one good decision. What was that transition like for you? I mean, you're going to the highest level of the sport, and you're making a substantial position change.
It was like I got to find a way to make this work. And what would happen was we'd go to training camp, and training camp back then was, about 5 weeks. Then you had the 6 exhibition games. So every day after practice, they would line up about 4 or 5 defensive ends, and I would take pass protection against 4 or 5 different guys beyond what we did at practice. And, you know, I don't know if practice made perfect, but practice made me better.
It usually does.
Yeah.
You mentioned some of the guys that you played with on the offensive line. That was a memorable group. Who stood out to you as the biggest character, the biggest personality on that offensive line?
Well, I don't know if there was we'll go back to when I started, though. I played next to Gene HICKERSON, who got into the Hall of Fame later than he should have. He should have been in first ballot. But playing next to Gene was an experience, and we used to have it when they run a stunt, tackle and crisscross. The rule was the guard would pick it up first, the first guy. So we're playing the Raiders, and Gene's guy comes over and whacks me. And I turned to him, we used to call him old man. I say, hey, old man, it's guard first man. Oh, yeah. A couple plays later, same thing. Gene, damn it, it's guard first man. And Gene's a finger waver, and he goes, no, guard first choice. So, and so I played next to Gene for 3 years, and then I got Robert Jackson, and we're partners in an insurance company. And Gene was immensely talented, but so was Robert. But Robert was probably one of the smartest guys I've ever played with. I mean, he just, you know, bing, 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 he could make calls for you. And then you had Tom DeLeon, who was the feisty one. And then you had Henry Shepherd, who was kind of looked like Charlie Manson. And then you had CODY RISIEN, who was, I call him my son, and he calls me Dad. But it was just a good group of guys that we did everything together, and the meeting rooms were fun. They were colorful.
The team walked a tightrope of tension all year. 12 games were decided in the final minutes of play. This penchant for heart-pounding theatrical thrillers kept the crowd on the edge of its seats and earned Sam Ritigliano cardiac kids.
What was it about that Cardiac Kids group that waited to the last minute every time?
Well, we didn't plan on waiting to the last minute.
It just worked out that way.
It just worked out that way.
What did it say, though, collectively about the team's character, that when push came to shove, more often than not, you guys rose to the occasion and got it done?
Well, I think it starts with the quarterback, and Brian had just an unbelievable year, but Brian was that guy that when he came into huddle, he could sell you that. Just give me just one more second, and I can, we can do this. And he made you believe in him. And but it's one thing to say it, but it's another thing to do it. And Brian was doing it game after game. He just kept making plays. And here's a guy that was like a 17th round draft pick, and you had a guy that was the 3rd overall pick in the draft, Mike Phipps, and Brian comes in. There's talk about a long shot of making it, and over the course of time. And I think coaching has a lot to do with it, because Brian was there when Blanton Collier came back to be a quarterback coach, which obviously Blanton was a brilliant mind. And then he got Jim Schaffner as a quarterback coach, and coaching has a lot to do with it. And we were very fortunate. We had good offensive line coaches. We had Rod HUMENUIK for a while, and then we had Howard Mudd. You
mentioned that you've had so many wonderful teammates. I'm wondering if there's a player that the Browns have had on their roster post your playing career that you've watched and said, gosh, I would have liked to have been his teammate.
Well, yeah, I think there's it's funny because I always used to make fun of the kickers, but Phil Dawson was one of my favorite players, and because he was a football player first and he was a kicker after that. And I tell you, Tim Couch, the beating he took, his first couple years here, and never complained about it, just, a lot of respect. I wouldn't have wanted to have been Joe Thomas's teammate, because that would have meant I wouldn't have had a job.
It would have been fun to play on a line with you like that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Do you see any similarities between you and Joe? It seems like just on the surface, played in the Big Ten, from the Midwest.
Yeah. Joe. Joe's by far. I don't know. They probably didn't have the technique, studies that back when I played, it was kind of just go do what you can do and make sure the guy doesn't hit the quarterback. And I always tell kids, I always look at it as it's a boxing match that if you start to lose, you turn it into a street fight. And, I got a few holding penalties. I did a little leg whipping, but, which means, basically I was probably one of the more unorthodox offensive linemen, where Joe, just pure technique and a technician. He makes a tough job look easy, and utmost respect for his Hall of Fame career.
How do you think your career would have played out if a team had drafted Doug Dieken and said, we're going to have Doug do what he's done? We're going to make him a tight end or a pass catcher in the league?
Well, I averaged 12 yards per reception, which is better than Ozzy's. I only had one. He had 600 and some, but...
and your touchdown percentage ratio was 100%.
100%. No, it was somebody made the right call. When I got here, we had two tight ends, MILT, MORIN, and Chip Glass. And, neither one of those would be considered of Ozzy's fluid style of playing, but
right.
that was the transition to the pass catching tight end from the old blocking tight end. So I probably could have been a blocking tight end. In fact, on short yardage situations, I would be one of the blocking tight ends, right. And then you have to go out if you were successful for a play and then come back in. But sometimes somebody just looks down on you and takes care of you.
Yeah. Were you lobbying with your various coaches through your career as a Brown to run a route, a trick play, catch a ball in the end zone? Were you pushing for that?
Well, unfortunately, when Sam came along, Sam was the receivers coach for the Denver Broncos when I played in the Senior Bowl. So he was my receivers coach. He never threw me a pass. He kind of ended my career early. But and I hadn't thought about it, but I played in the blue-gray game, and one of the tackles got hurt, and we didn't have another tackle. So Bobby Bowden, who was coaching at West Virginia at the time, was our head coach. He moved me to tackle for a quarter. And that was the first time I ever played tackle, and I had no clue whatsoever. I had no practice whatsoever playing tackle.
How'd it go?
I survived. We won the game.
Do you look back at that perhaps moment as
I
when
think
it all really happened?
That might have been my biggest mistake, going in there and doing it.
Or your biggest break?
Yeah, my biggest break. And I truly can reflect back now and say, yeah, it was my biggest break, because I wouldn't have lasted, 14 years and played every game during that time as a tight end.
Yeah. So take us through your lone catch in the NFL, a touchdown.
It was actually on a fake field goal, and it was supposed to go to Matt Barr, and Paul McDonald was the holder, and I, was so wide open that even Paul couldn't miss me.
So that wasn't drawn up that way.
No, it was drawn up just to get the ball to Matt Barr and get a first down and then go in. And I was pretty wide open, and it was one of those that got bigger and bigger as it was coming. Unfortunately, we were playing the Oilers, and my nemesis for 13 years, BETHEA, he wasn't there that week. Which I just would have loved to do it, and Alvin, Hall of Famer, is one of my favorite opponents. Just really a good guy.
What was it about Alvin that you enjoyed playing against?
This is competitive spirit. Obviously, I said he was in the Hall of Fame, but he would be yelling at me, and then when he found out I wasn't going to pay any attention, he'd yell at the guard next to me and stuff like that. And he was about this tall, and just a really great football player. And when I retired, he came in for a retirement dinner for me. And the year before, prior to mine, when he retired, I went down to his. And you hate the guy across you, for 60 minutes, but you also gain a lot of respect. And
Sure.
he is one of those guys. Another guy would be Leroy Selmon. I mean, he was one of the classiest guys that I've ever played against, but, Hall of Fame player that could kick your tail on a Sunday afternoon.
When you were at the point of your career where you knew it was at the end, take us through that, the decision to retire and what that eventually was like.
Well, I always figured retiring was quitting, so I wasn't going to quit. And they basically kind of told me we're going to go on with a younger guy, and probably rightfully so, because it was when they had signed Bernie Kosar, and I was already played 14 years and was pretty beat up. So they said we want to break in a new left tackle with the quarterback, and I was very, getting back to the timing situation, I was very fortunate that Gib Shanley had decided that he wanted to go out to LA, and that opened up a spot in the radio booth, and I ended up there and been there for a while.
Been there for a while indeed, and you mentioned that's really been your second and your longest career. That's your other office, and you've been there for 32 years, and I'm hoping that we could walk over there and talk a little bit about your second career with the Cleveland Browns. You good with that?
Oh yeah, always.
Malcolm Brown is the running back. 2 receivers left, 2 to the right. Goff takes the snap, play action fake, looks, getting a push, and he throws near side, and it's picked off. The Browns got it. Yes, they do. They have it. They jumped the route, and T.J. Carey got it.
Boy, he read that route perfectly.
1st and 10. The Browns have it at their own 49-yard line.
Browns fans have been blessed to have some pretty good play-by-play guys, legends really, Nev Chandler, and then Casey Coleman, and now of course Jim Donovan. You had a chance to work with all 3 of these guys. What is it about them? What was it about Nev and Casey, and what is it about Jim that makes them so good at their jobs?
Well, I think, I see a lot of similarities with Nev and Jim. Casey was more laid back, and he was like his dad, Ken. He did it more like that. Where Jim and Nev were perfectionists. I mean, they wanted everything right, and just amazing talents. And I guess you feel pretty lucky that you think you're lucky to play 14 years. You're pretty lucky to get good broadcasters to broadcast with like that.
Yeah, Jim's call last year from the win sticks out in my mind as one that I'll always remember. I'm sure you will too. Do you have special calls, plays, games that you remember through the years more than others?
Well, I remember his run, William, run.
On 2nd down, they give it to Green. Green stutter step, he's through. 1st down, 40, 45, 50, 45, 40. Run, William, run. 20, 15, 10, 5, touchdown.
We've been waiting for it to break the big one, but he saved it for the right time.
64 yards. And the rookie from Boston College, he was an inch away from busting one all day, Doug, and he just did it.
And then the Chubba Wubba Lubbo, and he's beating the crap out of me up here in the booth.
2nd down and 10, takes the snap, gives it. Chubb runs, he's to the 10, 15, he's to the 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. There goes Chubb, he's to the 30, 20, 10, 5, touchdown, Chubba Lubba Hub. 92 yards!
Pretty unbelievable. He has a 2nd gear. I just got hit more by you than I did in my 14 years in the NFL.
The funny thing about the Chubb run, I think we were down on like the 2-yard line or 8-yard line. And he says, "You think we can get it out of here?" "Oh yeah, no problem." Then he breaks it. I'm just, see, I know what I'm talking about.
Did you, when you started this ride so many years ago, did you ever, in your wildest dreams, imagine that it would take you all the way into your 70th year, and who knows how long you can continue this?
Well, you never think about when you're playing, you never, plan on retiring. It's just that, at some point time dictates that you got to do it. Same with this. I'm enjoying it as long as the people enjoy me, or I don't offend too many. Then we'll like to continue. But more importantly, I'd like to continue till they get to the Super Bowl.
That's what your goal is here.
Yeah. I mean, I think playing, broadcasting, whatever you do, that's what you want. I mean, you want to have that game where it makes a big difference.
What's more enjoyable for you, lining up on the line of scrimmage or taking a vantage point from high in the sky and never taking a glove?
I think playing. I mean, you can't replace that. That's a special thing. It's 1-on-1 or 11-on-11, whatever way you want to look at it, but just competing and trying to win, and hopefully by the end of the day you're happy and they're not.
So you come into it with no experience, a little bit of advice. As you were sliding into the role of color analyst, who were the guys' voices that were bouncing in your head? Did you have any role models that you listened to or liked growing up?
No, I didn't really watch that many. As I saying, the first pro football game I ever saw was probably the year before I got drafted, and somebody had given me tickets to a Bears game, and I go up there. They happened to be playing the Browns, and that was the first live game I'd ever seen. And I always remember it because it's got one of those greatest hits where Butkus just killed Ron Johnson. But I guess when I was playing, the network guys would, come to practice, and OLSEN would always come over, and he'd always talk, and we'd go, and you got an idea of what he was, fishing for information, what you were planning on doing. And I guess, he was such a nice, gentle guy for such a big guy. And he did such a great job on games. I said, boy, this guy's pretty good. And he got an idea of how you would talk to people and stuff like that. So I guess if I had a role model, it would have been Merlin.
Yeah. Catchers make great color analysts in baseball, for the most part, because they have such a great knowledge of how to handle pitchers and what they're thinking. Why is it that so many of the really good color analysts in football are linemen?
Well, I think sometimes you don't try to overcook the dinner. I mean, you can sit there and talk about things that a person might not understand. I mean, I think you have to break it down to, this is what I'm seeing. I want you to see what I'm seeing. And when you start, using technical terms that people aren't familiar with and things like that, you're talking to everybody, just not that hardcore, guy that knows football. You're talking to the other fans too. Jimmy paints such a great picture. He's like Picasso. I'm just a guy throwing darts.
Chubb in the backfield. One receiver left. The Browns are 1 for 1 on third down. Baker's got the snap. He's up in the pocket. He's looking left. Down the field. Firing. He's going for Landry. Down by the end zone. A tumbling catch for a touchdown. What a catch by Landry.
Unbelievable.
Mayfield with a rocket of 51 yards to go with a 66-yarder earlier, and the Browns are a kick away from tying the ball game up.
From that spot in the radio booth, you've seen more Cleveland Browns football than anyone. And I think we both would say that's an easy assumption. What do you make of what you see of this group? How good can this group be?
Well, this group can be real good. I mean, you have to put wins over stats. And it gets back to the team aspect, and everybody does their job. It's don't let Fred do it, as Blanton Collier would say, you do it. And I just think that, in a short period of time, John Dorsey has flipped the roster to the point that, you know, you can see where he's going in the building process. First you get the quarterback, then you get the playmakers, then you get depth, then you get the special teams guys. And you know, it's in a short period of time, it's been a pretty miraculous job of, you know, assembling and just flipping the roster to, you know, get football players.
Watching that last football game at the old stadium was one of the more difficult things you've ever had to see. And there's been some stretches of football since the rebirth that we all wish we could unsee.
Yeah.
But as you see now this rejuvenation of one of the NFL's most passionate fan bases, what does that mean to you, to go from that absolute valley of losing football in Cleveland to where they are now?
You know, it's funny because the people in Cleveland, they wear their emotions on their sleeve. I mean, when I used to do the morning exchange, and I would drive down to the station at, you know, 6:30 in the morning to do it, I could tell by the way people drove whether we won or lost. I mean, you know, if they won, go ahead, move right in. If they lost, what's that middle finger for? But no, I mean, that's the way these people feel about their football, and it's so infectious to the whole city when they win and when things are rolling. Those are the days, you know, that you enjoy, and you know, it's been tough for quite a few years. I mean, you know, you go through the Kozar era. I mean, those were fun times. You know, the Sipe, the Cardiac Kids, those were, you know, fun. And like I said, when I grew up, one of my favorite football players was Gary Collins because he got those 3 touchdown passes in the championship game. And then, you know, I got a chance to play with the guy.
What was that like meeting him for the first time?
It was, you know, it's like, wow, this is Gary Collins. Then as time got on, I said, oh, he's a little different. No, Gary, it was just an honor to be his teammate. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like it's an honor to be Leroy's and Gene Hickerson's. I mean, those, but there's a lot of other guys, you know, that didn't make the Hall of Fame, like Clay Matthews, who deserves to be there, Dino, and I talked about Robert Jack, all these guys, they were just, you know, it was a fun group of guys to be around.
One final question for you. How do you hope Cleveland Browns fans remember Doug Dieken?
Well, I think you kind of base your career on dependability, you know, being able to show up every Sunday and play, or, you know, the only games I've ever missed have been as a broadcaster. You know, football was a little tougher, but I missed a couple as a broadcaster. Yeah, just, you know, somebody, you know, just a regular Joe that got lucky.
No one's been more dependable than Doug Dieken. In fact, over the last 48 years, just 2 Browns games have happened without him being in attendance. Pretty incredible.
But I watched him.
Wow, that's a lot of football. Doug, thanks so much. We appreciate you stopping by. Make sure you check us out next week when we have another all-time Browns great in Club 46, driven by Bridgestone.